G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. Today I'm interviewing David Fradin from Spice Catalyst based in Silicon Valley, USA. Thanks for your time today, David.
Glad to be with you.
Let's start with how we know each other. We're both using the Matchmaker podcast guest and podcast matching service, I guess. We've just started using that. You've been using that for a while?
About a year now.
Oh, great. Yeah. Tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Spice Catalyst teaches the principles of product management and product marketing to companies around the world. Our leading client is Cisco, and we've trained about half of all the product managers at Cisco. I've been advocating for a while that a better title than product manager would be product success manager, because they're the person in the company principally responsible for product success. In smaller organizations, that's typically the president. And even in larger organizations, like Elon Musk calls himself the chief product officer, even though he's the chief executive officer of the company.
Yep. So product management, is that creating new products and also innovating or tweaking existing products for a better fit in the market?
It's both of those. The field of product management started as brand management at Procter & Gamble in 1932. And every brand manager at Procter & Gamble, or every president at Procter & Gamble since has come out of brand management. And then in discussions with David Packard and Bill Hewlett at Hewlett-Packard, who had started Hewlett-Packard, they brought the concept to Hewlett-Packard into Silicon Valley in 1938. And then the nature of what a product manager is and does and what they're responsible for has spread around the world.
Yep.
They are responsible in the early part of the product's life cycle to drive the innovation and the design thinking that defines what the product does, its value proposition, and what it accomplishes for the customer.
Right.
And then flowing from that is about 32 other things that they do.
Yep. Great. And your revenue, is that mainly through retainers or is project-based work as well?
Primarily project-based work, what I do consulting on an hourly basis, and the training that we deliver is on a per class basis.
Yep, great. And how did you start out?
I was recruited by a company that does the same thing back in 2008, 2009. And then one of the things that I noticed is that they did not have a set of written values. And I've always been used to operating in companies that have a set of values and that they follow those values, like the companies I've been with, Hewlett-Packard and Apple. They were also doing consulting and product management training. And they asked me to start teaching some of the classes. They asked me to write some of their initial courses, which I did in exchange for being able to teach. And then they asked me to take on business development. So in 11 months, I sold about $850,000 worth of training and consulting, which was a large amount of money. And the margins on the training is extremely large. It's very lucrative business if you can get your clients.
Yep.
And then we had a falling out over values. He promised profit sharing after I generated about $500,000 in profits for him. And then he decided, no, I'm going to keep it all. I said, okay. No, I'm not going to do this with you anymore. I'll go do it myself.
Yeah. So it's quite a common scenario, unfortunately. People get a little bit greedy and don't see the longer term value of having great people around and invested. Yeah. So what year did you decide to jump into your own business and how old were you when you made that jump?
Well, this company was in 2012. I started a company back in 1991, which was in the desktop video business. And it was picked by the San Jose Business Journal as the fastest growing company in Silicon Valley at the time. we were growing about 100% per year.
Wow. Mm. And how old were you in 91 when you launched for first?
That would have been 30 years ago. So I was in my early 40s.
Yeah, great. Yeah. And
I've been starting companies now for over 50 years.
Yep.
I started the Flying Club at the University of Michigan, and from nothing, we had no capital, no cash. By the time I graduated 4 years later, we had $25 million in sales, and I forget the number of airplanes that we had. And that club exists today because it had a set of values that I'd set out, and it has trained over 5,000 pilots that are flying many of the airlines worldwide.
Wow, fantastic. So you're a bit of a serial entrepreneur. You enjoy growing businesses?
Yes.
Yep.
And then the year after that, I started a nationwide student organization in support of the American supersonic transport, and later in support of science and technology, and took that to 11 employees and 45 chapters on campuses around the United States.
Yep, great. And the Flying Club, how many team members did you get up to there?
Well, it was primarily managed by the board, which was 7 people.
Yep.
And so we had a treasurer that actually did the treasury stuff. We had a person responsible for operations, another one responsible for safety and so forth. And we started out by first leasing the airplanes. And then when we saw we had enough revenue, we were able to go to the bank and borrow money. But before that, no one would loan a bunch of students $25,000, which would probably be about $250,000 today, to buy airplanes.
Yeah, yeah. Out of interest, what was it like working at Apple and HP?
It was wonderful because both of those companies have a good set of values. And I started at HP in the corporate PR department, handling siting issues, helping them site new facilities in new places around the country. And did a little bit of Dave Packard's personal PR in his role as chairman of the board. And I deployed word processing in the PR department, which at the time, this was 1980, it's the only department of the company that knew how to type.
Yeah.
So word processing made sense.
Yep.
And essentially, I was operating as an internal product manager. And the nice thing about HP is that it enabled you to move laterally. So I was able to move over into product management in the office systems group of the information networks division. And I had a product that was just beginning to be developed, and I had a product that was just about ready to be introduced. So I had 2 products, one at the beginning of the product life cycle and one at the beginning of the introduction or going to marketing. And some folks noticed I was doing a pretty good job. So Apple recruited me to bring the first hard disk drive to market on a PC,
yep.
We'll call the Profile. It was really cheap. It was only $3,600. No one could understand why anybody would ever want to store 5 megabytes of material and data.
Oh my goodness!
So that's what we were selling.
Yep.
And no one. It was a brand new market, and so we had to develop the market at the beginning of the market initiation. They noticed I knew how to manage, so they asked me to take over the Apple III product line as the group product manager. And Steve Jobs, as great as he was as a futurist, always thought that what he was thinking, which is actually 7 years in the future, was happening today.
Yeah.
So he wanted to kill the Apple III, and for that matter, kill the Apple II, to make room for his Macintosh, which he had not yet shipped. So he convinced the executive committee, after they brought the sugar water salesman, John Scully, in as president, to kill the Apple III product line. And they did in an executive retreat. Yet they had just recruited me a couple months earlier and said I had primary authority and responsibility for the product line. He didn't even bother to ask me about it. But about 3 weeks later, I was walking out of the corporate headquarters, and he called me into his office and he said, "Dave, we've got $20 million worth of piece parts spread between Singapore and Dallas, which is where the Apple III was made. What should we do about it?" And that would be about $200 million today. And the company was less than $1 billion at the time.
Jeez.
So to have a 20% loss as a result of that was kind of unacceptable. So I said, "John, what do you mean we, paleface?" And he didn't laugh.
Yeah.
So I'd explained the joke to him of the Lone Ranger, and Tonto was traveling through the desert, and they got surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming Indians. And when I tell this story to Indians from India, I have to add American Indians.
Yes.
And Tonto was an American Indian. So Lone Ranger says, here we're surrounded by 10,000 yelling, screaming American Indians. What should we do, Tonto? And Tonto, the American Indian, said, what do you mean, we, paleface? I said, you didn't ask me about what to do. He says, well, what should we do? I said, you got to give me the authority commensurate with responsibility, and we'll get the job done. And I told him the story of Kelly Johnson and the Skunk Works from Lockheed, where they could develop, build, and ship a high technology airplane in 18 months, when it took Lockheed more like 7 years.
Wow.
And I told him the story of the soul of a new machine, where Alpha General came out with a mini computer because they set up the team as an independent unit, moved them down to Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina. And I told him the story of the IBM PC, which kept getting killed by senior management and senior salespeople at IBM for fear that it might cannibalize their market. So they moved the PC development down to Boca Raton, Florida, which is about as far away as they could get from IBM headquarters in New York, but stay in the same time zone. And the IBM PC was very successful. And at that time, Scully knew that the PC was the number one, IBM PC was the number one competitor. So he said, put together a business plan. I did, with help from about 80 people and a core team of 7. And we presented it to an executive committee of the board July 15th, 1983. And the turning point of the meeting was when Floyd Kwame, who later he was VP of Marketing and Sales, later went on to be a venture capitalist and a technology advisor to George Bush, said to me, Dave, if we got a call from, by the way, as part of that presentation, I laid out 5 alternatives for the product line and how it compared to Apple values like good management, empathy for the customer, and things like that. And so Kwame said, Dave, if we pick the option you laid out of shutting down the product line, or the option you laid out, keep developing the product line and marketing and selling it so long as it sells, let the market decide. What if a dealer called you, what would you say? I said, well, if you allow the market to decide, I'll tell the dealer that, continue to sell it, we'll support it and develop it. And when we can no longer make a profit off of it, you or Apple will shut the product line down. But if you guys here decide to shut the product line down, then I said, I'll give your phone number, Floyd, to the dealer. And they laughed because they realized that that was a direct conflict with the company's values, and it would destroy the relationship between the dealers, who had a business model that Apple followed, such that they had to buy the computers and put it into inventory. So the dealers were taking the inventory risk, not the distributors and not the company.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, if we destroyed the value system, we would in part destroy the dealers.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a real shit show when Scully got in there, wasn't it? And obviously Jobs was ejected, but he came back in the early 90s, I think it was 1991 or something, and culled the product range and really...
98 he came back.
Was it? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was... they consolidated power under Jobs in 1984-85, such that he had the Mac division and the Lisa division.
Yep.
And he so overhyped the Mac that they sold 100,000 Macs in 1984, and they sold 4 in January of 1985.
Oh.
And in October of 1984, he destroyed the distribution chain. He fired all the manufacturing reps. Now, I hired some of them back as direct salespeople, but when you ship a computer that you couldn't do too much with, it only had, I don't remember, it was 64K or 128K, one of the two. The largest program you could run on it was 10K.
Wow.
So he couldn't do too much to it. He had hyped it so much, as he was such a great promoter, that most of those computers were bought by developers, and they found they couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
And couldn't get their money back. So within 6 months after January of 1985, he was fired.
Yep.
And forced out. I was at the same management level as him, running the Apple III product line. And I was a cash cow before Boston Consulting Group understood or defined what that was. And I was producing enough money to keep about 1,000 to 1,500 Apple employees employed, and enough money to help fund Steve's research and development and initial manufacturing of the Macintosh. But he went out and he acquired Pixar. No, first he did his next computer, which I called, when Business Week asked me about it, I said, "You mean last?" And sure enough, in Steve's words, it flopped up on the shore like a dead fish.
Yep.
And so I noticed that when I wrote my book, Building and Sailing Great Products, and this whole history I tell in the last 30 pages, he went and asked for advice from Dave Packard, the guy that I used to work for, around 1989. And he was off, in Siberia, so to speak, for the rest of that time, and was able to think about what he had done wrong and what he needs to do right. And when he came back to Apple, Apple was on its last legs. He said the reasons that Apple was suffering for those 12 years, 13 years after he left, is that it had lost its values. And it was exactly right. So he brought back the Apple values that the company developed in 1978. And he also did other things that Packard told him. He said, don't be afraid to cannibalize your own products.
Yep.
That's why he was not afraid to come out with the iPhone, which cannibalized the iPod. That's why he was not afraid to come out with successive versions of the Macintosh to cannibalize the previous versions. And another thing that Packard told him is that when you go into a recession, double down and spend more money on research and development, because HP had gone through 4 recessions by then. And keep your people, don't lay them off.
Yep.
HP would, when they had a recession, is they would have people work 9 days out of every 2 weeks instead of 10, so they could keep everybody employed and not have to go through the expense of finding, recruiting, and training new people when the recession was over. So we can see this very clearly after the recession in 2007, and Steve was still managing the company at that time. They doubled down on their research and development. They came out with the iPad and a lot of the products that we have seen since then, and they just absolutely exploded to become the most valuable company in the world.
Yeah, worth over $1 trillion now. I'd be interested. I heard Dave and Bill at HP were quite nice blokes, as we call men in Australia here.
Yes.
What was your dealings with them like?
They're very, very nice. I dealt with Packard mostly. And in fact, I was doing the PR for the board meeting down in Rancho Bernardo, which is in Southern California, near San Diego. I got in at about 3:00 in the morning before the board meeting, and the front desk gave me the key. I went up, opened the door, went into my room, and Packard was laying there sleeping. Scared the hell out of him. And I quickly retreated and went back to the front desk, and they gave me the key to my right room.
Yep.
And the next morning, I apologized to Dave that I had gotten the wrong key. He says, "No, that's okay. Don't worry about it." Now, this is a guy that not only started HP, but he also be the deputy secretary of defense. Very, very nice guy, very compassionate people. They cared about their employees. One of the first companies in the world to do profit sharing.
Right. I didn't know that.
He also talked extensively in the 1980s when the Ayn Rand notion that all a company has to do is make a profit. Capitalists were reading this book and they said, "To hell with the people, just make a profit." And he was strongly opposed to that. He also pointed out that if you look at Alfred Sloan from General Motors, his notion of accounting said that on a balance sheet, inventory is an asset and people are a liability. People are an expense. So whenever we go into a downturn, we fire people. But you saw in the Great Recession in the late 2000s that General Motors had like 18 million cars in inventory, and they all became immediately worthless.
Yes.
And the United States government had to bail them out from that mess. But they were following what they learned in MBA school and in finance school, that inventory is an asset and they had laid off people, and people are a liability.
Yeah.
Now in the United States, and I think in many countries of the world, people are so not going to put up with being treated as poorly as they have been through this COVID thing.
Yep.
A lot of them are saying, to hell with it. I'm not going back to work at that job. I'm going to go someplace else.
Yeah, well, they've got the Great Resignation. They've coined it, going on since April. I think 15 million Americans have quit their jobs. It's huge.
Yep.
Yeah.
But those companies that are thriving are those that take care of their employees,
Yeah.
like Apple, like Starbucks, like Amazon.
And they have clear purpose and a mission and good core values as well, which they live by.
Yes.
Yeah.
But all those companies I just mentioned have good core values. Starbucks, for example, if you're a barista there, they'll pay for your college education.
Great. Yeah. All right. Well, back onto your current business. Do you have some key numbers to illustrate the growth?
Well, we started with nothing.
Yep.
And doing hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. Last couple of years have been pretty rough because of the COVID.
Yeah,
we used to teach in person, and I just got approved as a learning consultant. I forget what they call it, by Appleton Green, and they are going to give me 10 clients, and we'll develop courses for them.
Yep.
So we should probably hit the $5 million mark from the hundreds of thousands of dollars within the next 2 years.
Yeah, great. And will that be in person or online training courses?
Probably do both. The problem with in-person training at some of our clients is that the client does not hold the student responsible for doing anything.
Yeah.
So 10 students might sign up and 8 will show up and 6 will pay attention.
Yep.
And also the other problem is I like a blended learning. I don't understand why they come to classes and hear us repeat the same thing over and over again. They could watch a video of what we teach, and then we give them an assignment where they work individually or with a group, and then they come to class and present their assignment to get feedback.
Yep.
And the level and the depth of learning would be significant. But some of our clients follow a learning and development model that dates back to the 1940s or 1950s, and they're not willing to change.
Yeah, I remember that from the university days. There's just not enough pressure or accountability put on the students to get up there and present and actually talk through in detail whatever the project is. I think that's, it forces you to really understand the topic and be able to, speak to it without really checking your notes. It's just a much better way, deeper way to learn.
Yep, and applying it as opposed to rote learning.
Exactly. So number of full-time team members you started with and where you're at now?
We've got 5.
Yep, plus yourself, so that's 6.
Right.
And you started out?
One of them is an executive assistant. The rest are trainers,
yep.
People that have had many years of experience in product management.
Yep.
And they teach my courses. Like I have a professor from who's in India that teaches my classes for Cisco in Europe.
Yep.
Otherwise, I have to get up at 3:30 in the morning, and most people can't hear what I'm saying when I'm snoring.
Yeah. Yes, I have that same problem, my girlfriend tells me. And so how many, was it yourself that started out, or you had a business partner?
I had a business partner, but he decided that he had another opportunity elsewhere, and he quickly drifted away.
Yep. So it started with 2 of you and you're now up to 6. That's great.
Right.
And when was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded?
Probably when I got the Cisco contract away from my previous competitor.
That is a huge win. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does success look like to you?
Having enough classes going on and enough instructors teaching them, and it's all the same content that I wrote. So I make a lot of money and not have to do anything.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
The problem that exists now in my business is the difficulty in finding the customer. And a customer that I need is either the VP of product management or product marketing and or the head of learning and development. And the problem is that seldom do they have a sense of urgency unless they've had a lot of product failures.
Yep.
One of my clients came to me and said, we just had 5 product failures and we don't have a repeatable process. Can you come in and help us define it? And he said that because they don't have a repeatable process, they've developed a culture of blame. And I had to go in and try and fix it.
That's dangerous. And how did you broadly fix that?
Well, I have a product management framework, which lays out all of the steps that you need to do in terms of putting together your product market strategy, handing it off to development or engineering, and then handing it off to product marketing, who in then turn hands it off to marketing. And I teach all of the components of that entire product lifecycle.
Yep, great. And you've had a few businesses. What funding did you use across various businesses? Investors, grants, bank finance?
Bank financing has not been available up until just recently. Just recently, we could get loans from the Small Business Administration, which I got a small one in order to help me get through COVID for the last couple of years. So they all had to be self-financed. I mentioned the self-financing we did for the Flying Club. When I was executive vice president of the Environmental Balance Association, I raised contributions from 125 business, labor, and agricultural organizations to fund that. When I started Desktop Video Products, I brought in an investor that was going to take a full-time job plus own a portion of the business. And I had just gone through a divorce, and divorce in California means everything I get, I have, she gets, and everything she has, she keeps. So I had nothing. And so he put up the capital. He put up about $20,000, and a year later it was worth over $200,000.
Wow, great return. And if you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
I think I would do the Kickstarter approach because that would be easier. The problem with, I started a company around 2002, 2003 called Maui Games because I wanted to live and work on Maui. And the scene behind me is actually the view from my Lanai and Kihei, Maui.
Beautiful.
About 100 feet from the ocean.
Yep.
And I bought that in May of 2001, thinking that I could get some business going there. And some people convinced me to go out and talk to venture capitalists and angel investors. And I, against my better judgment, I did, even though I had credit for inventing cell phone ads by RCN magazine in 2003. So, for example, I had a video game on the cell phone called Maui Mountain Biking, where you coast down Haleakala, which is the tallest volcano in the world. And if you should happen to fall off, it would say this ad brought to you by Zeal Optical or something like that.
Yep. Right.
And none of these 200 prospective investors could understand advertising, media, and video games and cell phones. So they thought there was no market for such a thing, and I couldn't raise any money. And by the time I had spent all of my resources and had to go do something else.
And look at that industry now. I mean, the gaming industry grosses more in sales than the movie industry does around the world. It's huge.
Right. And now the last time I checked, the cell phone advertising business is over $15 billion a year. The mistake I made is I was too early.
Yep.
And that the window of opportunity had not opened. But since then I've learned, and this is what I teach, you go out and you try to figure out what it is that your customer wants to do. Why do they do it? When do they do it? Where do they do it? How do they do it? What's standing in their way? How satisfied are they with their current solution? How important it is. If I had done that, I would have found that the technical limitations of the cell phone at the time for gaming was not quite there. Yeah. And it wasn't until 2007 when the iPhone came out that the market would begin to develop and begin to explode.
Yep.
And sure enough, that's what had happened. If I had started if I started trying to raise capital, say in 2009 or 2010, assuming the Great Recession didn't happen, I think I probably could have raised it then, because there was a couple of companies that were doing cell phone advertising, one of which was acquired by Apple, and another one was acquired by Google.
Right. Yep.
So there would have been an exit strategy also.
Yeah. Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so audience can learn from it?
Most stressful. Probably when the reviews from the students come back of the instructors and the content, because nobody likes to be told that their stuff doesn't smell, that it's good, and it's viewpoints from different ways. One of our clients used to have a culture of blame, where students who don't show up for the class write a review and blame the instructor, even though they never attended the class. And I tried to explain to that client that culture is going on, and that some of the questions that they were asking in their surveys and the reviews of the class, for example, maybe you only have 3 people in the class. Let's say you have 5, 2 don't show up, 3 are there, and 1 doesn't like it. And they insist that on your scale from 1 to 5, you have to get a 4.3.
Yep.
So that means everybody, all 3 of them, have to give 5s on everything. Otherwise, you go to the doghouse for the next class.
Yep. What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
Probably the social media marketing. Spending a lot of time on that. I have found that push marketing and outbound calling is not very useful in terms of getting new clients, that I have to establish my credibility in the marketplace so prospective customers come to me. And that takes a lot of time and effort.
Yep. What's the biggest platform for you? Is it LinkedIn?
LinkedIn, yeah. I've got about 16,000 connections there.
Yep. Great. What have you enjoyed least about managing fast growth?
Just you end up working late evenings and the weekends, and you no longer have any time to decompress or have time to yourself to do other things that you might be interested in.
Yep.
I learned early on the importance of delegation, and that is never do anything today you can get somebody else to do tomorrow.
Yep.
And trust in the delegation. So I try to delegate as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. Delegation's my middle name. What do you love most about growing a small business?
My goal has always been, when I get up in the morning, I want to do what I feel like doing, not doing what I'm told to do. That I have the freedom to make the decisions myself, and then, of course, accept the responsibility of the results of those decisions, as opposed to having to do what someone else is telling me to do, particularly if it doesn't map into my values. I mentioned earlier the importance of a company having values, and my former Maui property manager moved back to the Bay Area. And I told him, when you go out and interview with companies, ask them about their values. And if they don't match your values, don't go to work there, because you'll not be happy. That's what you mentioned earlier with the people leaving companies as a result of COVID, inspiring them to find out that their values don't match.
Yep.
And I also did a study of the first 500 companies that were on the Fortune 500. Only about 200 of the 500 are still around. And I was very familiar with most of them because I had raised money for them for my student organization. Companies like Boeing and United Technologies and Rockwell Standard and those kinds of companies. And almost without exception, those companies that did not have stated values and or did not follow their values have gone out of business.
Yep.
I said, I wonder if that applies to me as a person. So I made a little matrix. First column was the 25 organizations I've been affiliated with over the last 50 years. The second column is, did they have values? Third column is, did they follow values? And the company that I was with just before this, they had values because I had written it for them. They refused to discuss it amongst all of the consultants and the employees They didn't follow the values. And then the third column was, do those values map into my values?
Yep.
So 5 of those companies, it was a perfect match. And I was very, very happy working at companies like HP, Apple, some of the companies that I started.
Yep.
The other 20, I either quit because I just couldn't handle that disconnect, like the people are doing from COVID now, or I got fired. And if I got fired and I woke up the next day, I felt better.
Yeah.
That was a mercy killing.
Mercy killing.
One of the things I advocate that everybody do is
Yep.
make sure the company's values and their values are matched.
Yeah, it's good advice, and it's really enlightening. People do that exercise for themselves, whether it's going for a job or joining or starting a business. Absolutely, that's really good advice. What's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
Frequently, when I get a really small client, the president thinks they know it all. And invariably, they don't take the advice.
Yep.
They're smarter. And the funny thing is, without exception, they've all gone out of business. They never made it to the next level.
Yep. I assume you've read a lot of the Jim Collins book, Built to Last, Good to Great.
Yes.
Yep. And yeah, because it's all about mission, purpose, and core values. Great books.
Right. And I think he, before he moved to Colorado, he used to teach at Stanford. And I think when I went through Apple University, he was one of the guest lecturers.
Right. Wow.
So I had a chance to hear from him. Also, one of the guest lecturers was Tom Peters.
Ah, great.
Who quoted Good to Great quite frequently.
Yeah.
And the funny thing, the other bit of advice I could give is I was responsible for the Apple III as an independent business unit. And Tom came in to speak, and he had just written a book where he had interviewed the presidents of dozens of major corporations and tried to identify the characteristics of leadership at successful companies. And I asked him, I'm responsible for shutting down this product line. What advice do you have to give? And he was speechless. He had absolutely no idea. I'm going, I got something I got to really figure out here.
Because he wrote the book In Search of Excellence, didn't he? That was one of his big ones.
Yeah, that was the one. He had just come out with that. That's what he came to lecture at Apple University on.
Yep. What's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I think it's delegation, caring for his people or her people. I tell people when they come to work for me, just do the best job you can. If you make a mistake, that's okay, because most of us learn better from our mistakes than from doing things successfully. Yep. I learned that as a flight instructor. I found that if a student screws up, he learns a lot more about how to fly the airplane than if he does it perfect every time.
I love that saying, success is a poor teacher.
Yes. And third, it also spawns arrogance.
Yep, that's right.
Very few successful entrepreneurs go out and do the second one.
Yes.
And that's because of that. They think that if they did it over there, they could do it over here. And the third thing I advocate is tell me what you want to do in life. What do you want to do when you grow up?
Yep.
And it's okay if that's not working for me for the rest of your life.
Yep. Because
if you tell me what that is, I'll help you get there. And by me helping you get there, you'll be happier and you'll do a better job for me. Absolutely.
It engenders a lot of trust and respect, and people go out of their way to put their all in for you, for your business.
It boils down to loyalty.
Yep.
And by the way, loyalty is the answer to the question of how do you shut down a product line. Demonstrate and deliver loyalty back to those customers that have loyalty in terms of buying your product. Don't leave them high and dry.
Yeah.
For example, in the computer business, the customer's data is the most important thing. So one of the things I did as I began to shut down the Apple III product line is made sure that all the developers could move their software over to the Macintosh so that my Apple III customers, which by the way, at the time was the third largest installed base of computers in the world, could take their data over to the Mac. And the guy I handed all of this stuff off to was a fellow by the name of Guy Kawasaki.
Oh, wow. Another legend. Yeah. Yeah. Because he was early in Apple as well, wasn't he?
He came in after me.
Yeah.
And he was an evangelist for the Macintosh, working for Steve, trying to get developers to develop. And I brought them 500 of mine from the Apple III product line.
Yep, great.
Be the change you want to see in your business. Become more productive and less stressed with our free Transform Your Performance online course. Once you see the benefits, put your entire team through the course at no cost. We start out by telling you the secret to guaranteed success, then over 100 lessons help you be more focused, present, productive, and feel more in control about work. growasmallbusiness.com.
Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
It's important to make sure that the team has teamwork, that they have the backs of the other members of the team, as opposed to shooting them in the back.
Yep.
I noticed, and one of the things I did not like about American business is how much politics were being played, where people will actually lie about other people in order to destroy their career so they could get that person's job. I thought it was pretty petty, because I had run gubernatorial and presidential campaigns at a time in American politics when it was an honorable business, as opposed to the way it is now. And to see such petty politics being played in corporations was quite discouraging.
Yeah.
So one of the first things I did when I took over the Apple III product line, I didn't have a lot of time to get the 17 people to work together as a team. And I had an experience when I was in Minnesota going on an executive outward bound program. And the whole thing was to go into the outward bound Boundary Waters canoe area in northern Minnesota. And we paddled around for 3 days, and then our instructors left us, so we had to work for a team to pick a place to land and to pick set up our camp so we could eat dinner. The people couldn't get along and make the decisions, so we didn't set up camp until after the sunset. Now we're trying to cook in the dark, and we had no flashlights at that time. So I took my entire team on a 4-day rafting trip down the American River. And that helped them gel and the teamwork come together very quickly.
Yeah, it's so important, isn't it? And you would have seen a lot. You've seen obviously a lot in your own businesses, but also corporate over there with people and teams. Yourself as hiring, recruiting people, any advice for those listening, or any mistakes you can highlight?
Ask people questions like, what do you like and what you don't like? What would you change? Give them situational questions and say, here's the problem. What would you do? Because you want to see what their decision making is like.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Pareto, I follow the Pareto rule 80-20. So get them talking 80% of the time. It's very easy. I think especially small business owners are very engaged and engrossed in their business to talk a lot about themselves and their business. But the more the candidate talks, the better your gut is going to make a decision on whether they're going to be a good fit.
Yeah, exactly.
What are some things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth, apart from a 4-day rafting trip where you leave the team on their own?
I think team building exercises is very important. I think openness. One of the management techniques I would have is get together in what I call a scrum type fashion on a regular basis. And you go around the room and say, what's being done right, what's being wrong, and what are you going to do in the future?
Yep.
And then everyone knows what they need. If everyone knows what everyone else is trying to do, then they can jump in as a team member and help them get those things done.
Great advice. Yeah. Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Balance between private life and working life.
Yep.
I cut off. I have a fixed cutoff time every day, and then I try to stay away from the computer on Saturdays and Sundays.
Yep. Good. Yeah, it's hard, isn't it, when you love what you do?
Yep.
And how much professional development have you invested in yourself over the years?
Well, one of the things I was lucky at when was that? Yeah, when I started managing a gubernatorial campaign in Minnesota, there was a company there called Wilson Learning, which teaches you flexibility in your social skills, how to read people on 2 scales, driver, empathetic, analytical, and I forget the 4th one. And then we did exercises of evaluating people in the class. as to which one they are. And then how flexible are you to, if you get together with an amiable person and you're a driver,
yep.
You usually piss off the amiable person.
Exactly.
So you have to move in their direction in order to get along. It turns out that HP and Xerox had the same program being delivered. So when I got to HP, I was able to take a lot of professional development classes in their training and development area.
Yeah, it's great. I use something similar called DISC, which is a behavioral model. I think Marsden created it, the guy who invented the lie detector in the 1930s. And it's similar to that DIS and C. I'm a high D, so dominance. I'm task-orientated extrovert, whereas the C is your typical accountant or engineer. They're introverted, task-orientated. And it's a really good communication tool. Just allows you to understand that not everyone communicates the same way that you do or thinks the same way you do. So when I'm, for example, meeting with someone that's a high C, I change the way that I talk with them, gesticulate. A high C, I'll send them a very detailed report 2 days before I meet them, as opposed to meeting with another high D like me. We can just talk about that report and then flick through it and then move on and make decisions. But people, there's quadrants. Everyone reacts and behaves differently because of the way that they're wired. So I think it's really powerful.
Yeah, and I was real lucky growing up. When I was 14, I joined the Civil Air Patrol, which is an auxiliary of the Air Force. And we had leadership training. And I rose to the level of a captain in the Civil Air Patrol, leading a squadron of other teenagers. And then I went to Cass Technical High School, which is a high school for the best students in Detroit, and had good schooling there. And then to the University of Michigan, which at the time was one of the 10 best colleges in the United States. When I had started the student organization in support of science and technology, the Secretary of the Air Force sent me to the Air Force Air War College. The Secretary of Defense sent me a defense orientation conference to 5 military places around the United States, including Fort Benning, Georgia, which is the training center for the American Army's Rangers. So I got a lot of training from those kinds of things.
Yeah, great. Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Yeah, my number one mentor was a fellow by the name of Bill Magruder, who was a test pilot on about 150 helicopters and aircraft. He crash landed the first B-52. They blamed him. He studied it. Being an aeronautical engineer, found out the part was missing on the landing gear. It's the only part of the Air Force inventory that doesn't have a number. It's called the Magruder.
Right.
He ended up running, I think it was Douglas's supersonic transport program. And after the U.S. Department of Transportation picked the Boeing to be the prime developer, he was hired by Department of Transportation to manage that program. So I became friends with him then and stayed very close to him when he moved over to the White House after that was defeated by Congress to become a technology advisor to President Nixon. And I helped him with his new technology opportunities program in order to deploy technology to solve real world problems. Things like putting emergency medical technicians out into the suburbs rather than being centralized in downtown. As a result of the learning of saving lives, of doing that kind of thing in Vietnam. The development of a cold seal asphalt in order to fill potholes. The redesigning of the fire department's helmets and their oxygen tanks, which dated back like 30 or 40 years, so they couldn't even get through the door. Things like that in all sectors of the government. And then he spread all of those technological developments to the different agencies of the U.S. government, so Congress wouldn't have one target in order to shoot it down.
Yeah,
and a lot of those things are going on today.
Yeah, great.
So he mentored me along.
Yep. Do you have a board of directors or advisors at the moment?
No, I don't. I thought of the possibility of pulling together a set of advisors, but I don't know if the risk reward is actually there.
Yep. Now, you're one of the few we've had on that have exited businesses. You've had several of your own. Any advice for the audience listening, people thinking about exiting one day, or from your experience, what are a couple of things you'd tell them?
If they are thinking of exiting,
Yeah.
don't burn any bridges.
That's good.
Like, I think we got stuff on YouTube now where people are telling the companies they used to work for go to hell.
Yep. That'll come back.
They'll have difficulty finding the next opportunity.
Yeah. Or investors particularly. Yeah.
The old line is, you meet the same people on the way down as you met on the way up.
That's good. Yeah.
If you're doing good, don't destroy the karma.
Yeah.
And piss people off.
Yeah. All right, Dave, we're on our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
Doing a balance between the marketing and then the organizational things. When I started the Environmental Balance Association in Minnesota, the first thing I did is I went out and bought furniture, had stationery designed and printed, business cards designed and printed, bought office equipment and so forth, rented an office, and sat down and said, now I'm in business.
Yep.
And the people responsible for the funding of it hadn't done their job. So I had to run this thing for 4.5 years in a constant debt, worrying about every day. So the first thing you do when you start a business is get a customer.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else doesn't matter. Now, today, you build your first calling card, which is your website. And then that's your brochure. And you use that for marketing and go out and do the sales on that. So the important thing is to focus on the customer, not on all the other organizational things.
Yeah, reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, Peter Drucker, who actually worked with Alfred P. Sloan at General Motors in the 40s. And this is one of my favorite quotes: because the purpose of business is to create a customer, the business enterprise has 2 and only 2 basic functions: marketing and innovation. Marketing, innovation produce results. All the rest are costs. Marketing is the distinguishing, unique function of the business.
Exactly. I'll give you an example of that. I had put together a promotion for the Apple III that I wanted to roll out, that I knew that would work. And a lady by the name of Donna Dubinsky, who later went on to found Palm, was head of distribution. And she says, "I'm sorry, our computer systems will not enable us to do that kind of promotion." I said, "What are you, the sales prevention department?" It's your computer system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would walk into the legal department and say, "Is this the sales prevention department?"
Yeah.
I was doing a $15 million deal with Sears.com to put Amazon-like recommendations on their website. And after I'd gotten through purchasing, I ended up in the legal department. They had all sorts of things. I said, "What, are you the sales prevention department?"
It's a good icebreaker. Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Which book has helped me the most?
Your favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Probably Crossing the Chasm.
Great book.
Jeffrey, I forgot his last name offhand. Crossing the Chasm.
I've read that recently. It is by Jeffrey A. Moore.
Yeah, and it's been updated. There's a newer version out now. And
yeah, that's the one I've been reading. It's just great. It's very tech focused, obviously, but it's great insights. Wonderful book.
And he was another one of the lecturers at Apple University that I was able to be up close and personal with.
Yep.
Jeffrey.
Yeah, that's it. Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Ooh. Nothing right now, other than occasionally I look at other product management and product marketing syllabus or courses.
Yep.
And found, for example, there's a lot of schools of entrepreneurship that have been popped up in the United States. And about 4 years ago, the New York Times did a article on that. And I went and studied the curriculum of those 200 schools. And it turns out that they're missing about 40 of the 130 competencies that a business has to have in order to be successful. Many of them are predominantly office rental businesses, promising to help develop the entrepreneur in some of those areas, but they miss the big ones, like the one I talked about earlier. Understand what is it that your customer wants to do.
Yep. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I think books on small business management would probably be the best.
Yep. Finally, my favorite question. What would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Find that first customer.
Great. Thanks very much for your time today, Dave. I think the audience got a lot of value out of what you shared with us in your journey. Almost 50 years, both corporate and starting several of your own businesses. And congratulations on your success. And you've worked with and been around some amazing legends in the business and tech space, from Packard, Hewlett, Jobs, and Kawasaki, etc. So that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that with us today.
Thanks for having me.
That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey.